Welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McGonville. It's a return to industry news today, so that's what I'm going to do. This is the big stories that I've seen come out over roughly the last month, so essentially October, first part of November, that I think are worth talking about. Some of them are painfully obvious and everyone's talking about, some of them a little less so. So with no further ado, let's get stuck straight into it. And I think the biggest news in the last couple of days has that Seiko and all its brands, so Grand Seiko, Prospects, Presage, everyone is now out of Baselworld. This is probably no great surprise to anyone. It's certainly not a surprise to me. At the risk of being boring, I'll return to a theme that has come up regularly whenever I've spoken about Baselworld, and that is that Baselworld has some significant problems in its relationship between its brands, and in particular the brands and the media that come to that. Baselworld was traditionally a business-to-business kind of convention. Businesses would come together, so watchmakers would come together with their sellers and talk about what they were planning on doing, and the watch buyers would then make their orders. It's been changing a fair bit over the last few years, particularly with the explosion of social media and electronic media, and it's become at least as much a business to media kind of event as it has been a business to business kind of event. However, that is increasingly offering a poor return to anyone that's not Rolex, Tudor or Patek. Any kind of analysis of the coverage coming out of Baselworld would show that essentially it's presented as if it's a Rolex, Tudor, Patek event and everyone else is a bit of a sideshow. My quick analysis would indicate that whilst those three brands represent perhaps 2 to 3% of the watches that are on sale or being displayed at that show, those three brands routinely get something like 30 to 35% of all the media coverage. And that's why I think I've always thought that if you're a brand kind of in the mix with Rolex, Tudor or Patek, it doesn't make a lot of sense for you to go to Baselworld. You will always be seen as, you're almost structured to be the bridesmaid, and I don't think if you're a brand that wants to present yourself as moving forward, that's a place you want to be. So I've been saying in a number of videos that I thought all of these brands that see themselves in any way, shape or form competing with Rolex, Tudor or Patek really have no place at Baselworld. Hence, when Swatch pulled out, it was, for me, perfectly predictable. When Breitling pulled out, it was perfectly predictable. And now that Seiko and Grand Seiko have left, again, I think that follows a pattern. However, I think we are reaching something of a stabilization point, because I don't think the coverage of Tudor, Patek and Tudor is going to continue to grow. I think it'll be pegged at about that 30 to 35% of articles and YouTube time. So that other 70% needs to go somewhere. And with a lot of the big players like Swatch, Breitling, now Seiko pulling out, the few big conglomerates that are left, and in particular LVMH, may feel that the balance has now tipped such that there's enough in that remaining 65-70% of coverage that they can get some real traction, that they feel that there's still enough clear air for them to bother turning up to this event. The other thing I would point out, and this is particularly for LVMH, it could actually apply to Richemont, but they left Baselworld ages ago. But for LVMH, the changes that are going on at Baselworld are particularly important. Important to remember that LVMH is way more than just watches. That in addition to its watch brands, it's got vast holdings elsewhere. And in particular, in fact, I did doing some research, the watches part of LVMH is in fact the smallest revenue earner of its 6 major parts of the organization it reports upon. So the watches turnover every year is around about 4.1 billion euros. But compare that to wine and spirits is over 5 billion, perfume and cosmetics over 6 billion, and fashion over 18 billion. And a thing that they call like select retail, I don't know what that means, that's over 13 billion. So in LVMH's kind of mindset, that watches are not how it sells itself. Its to some extent a sideline. And now bear that in mind when you think about the kinds of changes that Baselworld's talking about. One, it's already watches and jewelry, and so LVMH may be looking to expand what it shows in terms of jewelry at the show. Baselworld's also been talking about allowing more and more non-watch related sponsorship at its event. So LVMH might be thinking that this is a great opportunity for them to perhaps, if there's a convention or a panel, that panel could be brought to you by Moët champagne, or it could be brought to you by Hennessy whiskey. So I think that LVMH is probably seeing and has available to it business opportunities at Basel that other companies that are strictly within the watch world don't have. And I also wouldn't be surprised to see more smaller, really small brands going to Baselworld. And Baselworld's been talking about the fact that they've actually got more exhibitors next year in number than they had this year. And that's, again, not surprising when you think about it, when you think through it. Those brands routinely get little or no coverage, and so when when Swatch and when Breitling and when all of the other big brands escape, and someone like Hodinkee and Worn and Wound and all the other people turn up, are desperately looking for something to talk about other than just Rolex, Tudor, Patek, these smaller brands might suddenly think, here is an opportunity for us. And so the business case for them starts to get more sensible. So I wouldn't be surprised to say, I've said many, many times, I do not see Baselworld going anywhere. I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a concentration around a smaller and smaller number of very big brands, and then they're going to have around them a vast constellation of the tiny little brands that can't justify running their own show, can't justify turning up all over the place, and are willing to take the risk that they'll get some coverage out of Baselworld with whatever the big few brands leave behind. Okay, more news. Apparently the Swatch Group and Calvin Klein have agreed to part ways. Swatch will not be renewing their license with Calvin Klein, and you get the impression that Calvin Klein isn't that unhappy about it either. In the news, in the press releases around this, both sides kind of make it plain that neither was happy with the other. Swatch blaming internal management issues within Calvin Klein. Calvin Klein seeming to indicate Swatch never really gave the brand the push it meant to. I think it was always a strange tie-up. I never really understood what Swatch thought being in partnership with Calvin Klein was going to bring them. So again, unsurprising. I will be interested to see where this goes for Calvin Klein watches in the future. Not really news, but something I'm looking forward to. So I'll advise you all to keep your eyes out for it. Dubai Watch Week is coming up very soon, November 20 to 24. Now, in this particular case, I'm not expecting there to be a lot of interesting watch releases. So if you're just about the watches, then perhaps you could skip it. But I suspect there's going to be quite a few interesting news articles, panel discussions and things coming out of it. And that seems to be how they're pushing this in the media. They're advertising, they're pushing very hard that there's going to be a number of forums where a lot of big industry players from across the market are going to be coming together and talking about issues like, how does the luxury watch ecosystem work? How do they control creative issues between brands and retailers and distributors? And how should brands cope with the fact that more and more people like you and I research the hell out of topics before walking into a dealer, and we often know more about the watch than the person trying to sell it to us. I think there could be some really interesting things in that. So give you all a heads up, you might want to keep an eye out for that in about a week. Okay, so this is a bit of a crossover between something in the media and something in the industry, but I'm going to put it in the industry heading. There was an article in Revolution magazine this month and on the net about the rise of French watchmaking. Really interesting, because I've had one or two emails from people that watch this channel pointing me also towards things that are happening in the French watch industry. And there's a lot of brands which I don't think are well known, but which are emerging and becoming bigger. If you if you hang out on YouTube or if you hang out on the net, you will, and you're listening to me, there's every chance you're an English speaker. And as such, you're going to know that there's a whole lot going on in the US market space, particularly micro brands. And you're going to know that there's a whole lot going on in the UK because they speak our language, and their marketing materials are naturally attractive to us. Their websites and all of that material is naturally in our wheelhouse. There's a couple of big French brands like, say, Lip or Bell & Ross, who have been dealing in a sort of a bilingual world for a long time, and we have awareness of. But for example, one of my subscribers pointed me towards a brand. I might mispronounce this. Akrone, Akrone, Kickstarter brand and so forth. Fantastic watches. They look really great. There's something I'd be really interested in following up on, but it's really tough because a lot of their stuff is in French and the translations aren't great. They're not easy for me to get hold of. And that's true of quite a number of the smaller French brands I looked at. So I think that's going to be a real challenge for the French, the emerging French watch industry, in that they're going to really have to make some choices about what language are they going to treat as their first language, and what's that going to mean in terms of whether they're going to be a mostly inwards looking francophone kind of industry, or whether they're going to be truly global, which unfortunately means, particularly on platforms like this, you're going to have to treat English as if it was an equal first language, which I think may be a challenge for some of these companies. So again, interesting thing to look out for. Go check out that article in Revolution. Give these brands a bit of a try, and be prepared for the fact you might have to work a bit harder to understand some of their materials. Moving gears completely to hardcore industry type stuff, first semester results. So it's a European thing talking about first semester, so I dare say what they're talking about is first quarter results of the financial year 1920. Well, they're out anyway for Richemont, and one of the things I took out, the number one thing I took out of that is that pretty much everyone like me that is based in the West and speaks English and talks about watches has no clue about what's going on in the industry. So what I mean by that is, if you go to pretty much any of the English-speaking YouTube channels that talk about Richemont and other sort of mainstream luxury brands, so whether that's John P or Frederico or Watchbox or Jewelry at the Time Teller, pretty much any of them, the general consensus is that Panerai is dying. I think John P may have actually said this is a brand that is dying, that we will probably not see very soon. So imagine my surprise when we read the Richemont financials and find that the star of their show, the brand within their stable, which is driving their growth, is in fact Panerai. So what that tells me is we have no clue. And it's not that we have no clue about what's happening in our neck of the woods. It's that we, in the particularly English-speaking West, have very little clue about what's happening outside of our increasingly small backyard. And that's one of the reasons why in a comment thread recently someone brought up in one of my videos that Breitling was seriously suffering. I take that with a grain of salt. I don't disbelieve the poster. I wouldn't be at all surprised to find that Breitling may be suffering in the United States, or maybe suffering in Australia, or maybe suffering in Western Europe. There is absolutely no guarantee, and in fact all the evidence I have at the moment would kind of indicate that has no links at all to how Breitling or any other brand is going globally. So I thought that was the most interesting message out of the Richemont first semester reports. Oh, by the way, generally Richemont's doing okay. The watches are flat, stagnating, not going backwards much, but not growing as fast as I'd like. I'll put a link to the actual figures, and you can go look at them yourself if you want. finally, to wrap this up, and it's a little bit of watch news, a little bit of watch industry news, and it's very Breitling focused. I've noticed I'm talking a lot about Breitlings these days, probably because I went and bought, a Breitling, and it's my favourite watch at the moment. That is that Breitling seems to be in the process of radically overhauling its range. Most people may be aware announced a new Avengers series. I'm not going to go into that in detail right now. I'll do another watch news report on that. But new watches come out. The new range of Avengers is substantially smaller than the old one, the old range that they had replaced. And it also seems to have coincided with the removal of the Colt from the range completely. The Colt, which was their kind of entry level and mass seller, is now no longer present on any website that I can find for Breitling around the world. So I'd say that's gone. So I think this is probably an element. What you're seeing here is really two things. One, Breitling is doing, as many people have been kind of telling it to do, pruning its SKUs, pruning its range, and it's also lifting itself up the totem pole. The other thing, it appears to me as though they've also radically reduced their what they call their galactic line, which is kind of like their high-end, particularly dress watches. I recall that there used to be a whole bunch of men's watches in there as well, and they're all gone. That galactic line is now solely some sort of older female-focused watches. It'll be curious to know what the future of that is over the next few years. I'll put it out here first. Would not be surprised to see that range, the galactic range, get significantly pruned further, potentially dropped altogether, or repurposed in the next few years. And that's kind of linked to also something I did in the video, which should be out already, on the relationship between watch brands and women. So anyway, that's it. I've really quick coverage of some of the news. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches. If you hang on a little while, a card's going to come up with my Instagram and email address. Get in contact with me if you want. Please subscribe to this channel. It helps me grow and helps me keep moving forward. Thanks very much. Bye.